They called him the Shadow of New York. Marcus Reed didn't have a heart. His mansion was like a fortress. His rules were the law, and rule number 1 was simple: no strangers, ever, but one freezing Tuesday night. His maid, a young woman named Rose, broke that rule. She snuck her grandmother, sweet old Ada, into the mansion, because Ada had nowhere else to go. And when Marcus Reed came through those front doors, suit torn at the shoulder, knuckles bruised, smelling like cold air and whatever dark thing owned his night, he stopped, because sitting in his big leather chair in the middle of his living room was a tiny old woman humming a lullaby. 6 bodyguards pulled out their guns instantly. Red laser dots danced right across the old woman's chest. Rose threw herself over her grandmother, crying, shaking, begging for mercy. She squeezed her eyes shut and waited for the worst. But instead, she heard something fall, something heavy, something soft. She opened her eyes, and the most dangerous man in all of New York was on his knees on the marble floor, tears running down his face. "Grandma," he whispered, "you're alive." Why would a man like that, a man the whole city feared, fall to his knees in front of a grandmother he'd never met? Stay with me, because this story is about to change everything you think you know about family. Asterisk, 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 3 in the morning. The phone buzzed on the nightst, and in the dark staff room, Rose jolted awake, her heart already hammering before she even said hello. The voice on the other end was fast, breathless, like it needed to get every single word out before something went wrong. Greenfield Nursing Home, the main water pipe had burst. The whole basement was flooded. They were moving everyone out right now, but there weren't enough places to take all the residents. If Rose didn't come pick up Ada tonight, Ada would be sent to a temporary shelter over 100 miles away, and Rose might lose contact with her completely. Rose sat up straight. Feet hit the cold floor, and the world fell apart, not because of the call, but because she had nowhere to take her. Rose's little apartment in the Bronx had been shut down for a month, black mold all over the walls. The health department had slapped an uninhabitable notice right on the door. Since then, Rose had been sleeping in the staff quarters at the mansion, living out of one suitcase, praying nobody noticed. She didn't have close friends she could call at 3 in the morning. No family she could reach out to. Nobody, because Rose Thornton had never really had anyone except her. Her parents died in a car accident when Rose was 4 years old. She didn't remember their faces. She didn't remember their voices. Only the smell of a certain perfume, and the feeling of being lifted by unfamiliar arms in the middle of a rainy night. The foster system passed her through 3 different families, and then Ada fought for her. A woman who cleaned office buildings for very little money stood in a courtroom and said, "This child is my family, and nobody is taking her away from me." From that day on, Ada was everything. Mother, father, home, the reason Rose got up every single morning, and right now, that woman was sitting alone in a flooded nursing home. Confused, scared, not understanding what was happening. Rose didn't think, she just moved. She threw on a thin coat, ran to the parking area in the back. The snow was slashing at her face like tiny knives. Her old car shook in the wind. The heater had been broken since last winter. She didn't care. She drove through roads buried in white, both hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles went pale. And in her head, only one thought kept repeating. Get there in time, get there in time, get there in time. When she arrived, the nursing home looked like a sinking ship. Water was spilling out through the front entrance. Staff ran in every direction with stretchers and wheelchairs. Ambulances wailed in the distance, and right there, in the middle of all that chaos, Ada sat in a wheelchair near the doorway. Small, fragile, gray hair coming loose in the wind, both hands holding the old worn leather bag she'd carried for as long as Rose could remember. She looked up at Rose with cloudy eyes, half recognizing her, half not, and in the gentlest voice in the world, she asked, "Where are we going, sweetheart?" Rose dropped to her knees right there in the cold, took those thin, freezing hands in hers, and lied. "Somewhere safe, Grandma." Her stomach knotted tight, because the only place she could take her right now was the most dangerous place in all of New York City, Marcus Reed's mansion. 3 months ago, a delivery guy had gotten lost and rang the service bell by accident. Marcus didn't even have to speak. One look from him, and that man left the estate in an ambulance. Nobody broke the rules here without paying for it. And Rose was about to bring a complete stranger right into the devil's fortress. She helped Ada into the car and drove back in silence. Ada fell asleep in the passenger seat almost immediately, breathing soft and even, completely unaware of where she was headed. When Rose parked in the back alley, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely turn off the engine. She carried Ada through the back kitchen door, dark and empty. The morning shift hadn't started yet. Every step on the tile felt like a drumbeat inside her chest. She laid Ada down on the small bed in the staff room, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and watched her sleep. Ada's face was peaceful, not a single wrinkle of worry. Completely unaware she was lying in the wolf's den. Just tonight, Rose whispered, her hand resting gently on Ada's cheek. Just until I figure something out. She stood, looked at her one last time, then slipped into the hallway and closed the door as softly as she could. She still had 3 guest rooms to clean before sunrise. Marcus's direct orders. If she didn't finish, there'd be questions. Questions meant attention, and attention in this house was a death sentence. Rose rushed down the hall, cleaning rag in hand, her mind racing. Maybe she could call another nursing home before morning. Maybe find a shelter online. Maybe a charity. Maybe, then she heard it. A sound that froze her entire body in the hallway. Footsteps, slow, unsteady, dragging over stone, coming from the direction of the staff room. Rose dropped the rag and ran, no thinking. No planning, just her legs and pure, raw fear carrying her through the dark corridor. And when she turned the corner into the main hallway, her worst nightmare was standing right in front of her, Ada, walking down the hall, back slightly hunched, steps somehow steady, her right hand gliding softly along the silk wallpaper that cost tens of thousands of dollars a panel. And her mouth was humming, a lullaby, the one she used to sing to Rose every night when Rose was little, when their tiny apartment above the corner store was the whole world the two of them had. When Ada's voice was the only thing that could push back the dark and the nightmares. That melody was now floating through marble walls and expensive paintings, fragile, out of place, like a wildflower growing in the middle of a minefield. And Ada was walking straight toward Marcus Reed's private office. "Grandma," Rose called, her voice as soft as she could make it, just loud enough to reach her, just quiet enough not to wake any guards upstairs. "Grandma, please come back." Ada didn't turn, didn't slow down, not a single sign that she heard, because in Ada's mind, Rose didn't exist right now. The marble hallway didn't exist, the mansion didn't exist. Dementia had gently carried her somewhere else entirely, into a different world. A world where she was walking through the house she grew up in 30 years ago, where her father's old armchair sat by the window, where the smell of apple pie always filled the air. She was going home, at least that's what it felt like inside her head. Rose moved faster, trying to close the gap without making a sound. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her fingers, in her temples. Every second was 1 second closer to disaster. If a security camera caught this, if a guard on patrol walked by, if Marcus Reed discovered there was a stranger in his house. She couldn't let herself think further than that. The main hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel of luxury. Warm yellow lights washing over gilded paintings and marble statues on tall stands. Every single thing in this place spoke the same language. Power, the kind built on other people's fear, the kind that didn't forgive mistakes, and certainly didn't forgive a 78-year-old woman humming a lullaby and touching the walls. Ada stopped, right in front of a heavy oak door, the one that led into Marcus Reed's private office. The door was slightly open. A thin strip of light from the desk lamp inside spilled into the hall. Ada tilted her head, peeked through that gap, and her cloudy eyes lit up, because to her, That big leather chair behind the desk was her father's armchair. The one where he sat with the morning paper, where she used to climb into his lap as a little girl, where she had felt safest in the whole world. Ada pushed the door open, walked right into the office of the man who ran New York's underworld. As easy and calm as walking into her own living room, she sat down in the leather chair, leaned back, both small hands resting on the armrests, her little feet not even reaching the floor, and she kept humming the lullaby. Rose stood in the doorway, both hands gripping the frame, heart splintered into pieces. Ada looked so peaceful, so happy, completely unaware she was sitting in a chair that nobody in this mansion dared to touch, not even the coldest, most dangerous men. Pull her out right now. 3 steps into the room, take her hand. Guide her out before anyone sees. Just 3 steps. Rose had barely crossed the threshold when the entire mansion shook. The front door downstairs flew open with such force. The crystal chandelier in the foyer swung, its crystals knocked together with a sharp, ringing sound. Like a warning bell, heavy footsteps thundered across the marble floor. More than one person, fast, decisive, the footsteps of men coming back from somewhere nobody wanted to know about. When Marcus walked into the main hall that night, suit torn at the shoulder, knuckles bruised, carrying the scent of cold air and violence, the first thing he saw was a figure in his leather chair. 20 years in the underworld snapped on in an instant. His hand went to his waistband, where the gun waited like a promise. Like a threat, that was all his brain needed to process. Intruder, his house, his chair. The 6 bodyguards behind him drew their weapons at the exact same moment. Red laser dots all converging on the chest of the small, gray-haired old woman. Everything was 1 second away from ending. But then she looked up, and Marcus Reed's world stopped turning. Not because of her face. 20 years had changed too much. Wrinkles had redrawn every line. Time had taken the sharpness from her eyes and replaced it with the soft haze of old age. He couldn't recognize the features he held in his memory, but the melody was unmistakable. It was the same melody he had heard every night in a tiny apartment above a grocery store in Brooklyn. The same one she sang when he was 8 years old, skinny, covered in bruises, lying on an old sofa, feeling for the very first time in his life like someone actually wanted him to stay, the melody he still heard in his dreams, the only thing that had ever given him peace, inside an empire built entirely on fear. Then Rose burst out from behind the door, screaming one single word that tore through the night, "Grandma," and it went through Marcus Reed like a bullet. Grandma. Only one person in the world was called that. Only one, the one he had spent 20 years searching for, the one he had spent millions of dollars trying to find, the one he had tracked through every record, every database, every nursing home from Brooklyn to Boston, only to be told she was dead, that everyone was dead, that he was the only one left, and now she was sitting here, in his chair, humming his lullaby, alive. That was the moment his knee hit the marble. That was the moment you saw at the very beginning of this story. But here is what happened after. The hallway went silent, the kind of silence so thick, you could almost feel it pressing against your skin. The 6 bodyguards stood frozen, weapons lowered but not put away, fingers still closed to their triggers. Not one of them knowing what to do, when the man the entire underworld feared was on his knees. Crying, Marcus pressed his face into Ada's wrinkled hands and cried, not the cry of a crime boss, not the cry of the shadow of New York, the cry of an 8-year-old boy who had been holding it in for 20 years and had just found the only piece of the world he thought was gone forever. Ada looked down at the man kneeling before her. Her cloudy eyes moved slowly across his face, like she was turning the pages of a very old book she wasn't sure she'd ever read. Dementia had stolen so much from her. Names, faces, years, but some things lie deeper than memory, deeper than language and logic, things carved into bone, into muscle, into the very rhythm of the heart, where no illness can ever reach, and one of those things woke up in that moment. Ada's hand, trembling, spotted with age, rose on its own, and gently stroked the man's hair, the exact same motion she had made 20 years earlier, when little Marcus cried on that old sofa after a nightmare. Same pressure, same pace, same gentleness. Her hand remembered what her mind had forgotten. Then she tapped her cane on the floor. Twice, light but firm, the way she had always done when something needed to be said. "Look at you," she said softly. Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 meals cooked for empty chairs. "You still won't eat properly." Marcus lifted his head, tears still running, eyes wide, trembling, like a man terrified he was only dreaming, and would wake up any second now. "I've been looking for you for 20 years, he said, his voice breaking. "They told me you were dead. They said everyone was gone. SHH. Ada smoothed his hair in that same steady, gentle rhythm. Like 20 years of separation had never happened. "I'm here now, sweetheart. I'm right here." Behind them, Rose was still on the floor, where she had thrown herself in front of Ada, both hands pressed over her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why the man she feared more than anyone in the world was crying at her grandmother's feet, but she knew, the way you just know certain things, that she was watching something sacred. Something she had no right to see and couldn't look away from. The bodyguards stood like stone, eyes straight ahead, doing everything they could to pretend they weren't even in the room, because the man weeping at the feet of a tiny old woman in a worn floral dress wasn't the shadow of New York right now. He was just a boy who had lost everything and had just found one small piece of it back. Then Ada lifted her head, looked at Rose with eyes that were both foggy and impossibly kind, and asked in the most confused, most honest voice, "Do you know this boy, my love?" *****, 20 years earlier, Brooklyn, the back alley behind a dry cleaner on Atlantic Avenue, where the smell of bleach and sour garbage and sewer water mixed into an air that only homeless children ever learned to breathe. 8-year old Marcus Red was curled against a brick wall, both hands over his head, back pressed to the cold surface like he was trying to sink into it and disappear. 3 older kids stood over him. The biggest one, maybe 12 or 13, was holding the apple Marcus had just stolen from the street cart on the corner. He stole it because he was hungry, that was all. His stomach had been empty for 2 days. The apple sat right at the edge of the cart, red and full, and just within reach. But a street kid didn't have the right to be hungry, and the neighborhood boys were teaching him that lesson with their fists. "Dirty orphan," the biggest one spat. "Next time you want to eat, you ask for permission first." Marcus didn't cry. He had learned early that tears didn't buy mercy. They only bought more contempt. His uncle, the only man who still shared any blood with him, had brought him to New York 6 months earlier with promises of a fresh start, then vanished into the city like an 8-year-old boy was nothing more than a bag left behind on a train platform. After that, Marcus lived off whatever he could grab, slept wherever he could find, and learned how to endure without letting a single tear escape. The 3rd punch had just landed on his shoulder when a sound split the alley in two. A cane striking the pavement, hard, decisive, booming like thunder under a clear blue sky. "Get away from that child right now, or I swear to God, I will call every mother in this neighborhood down here." The kids turned. A woman stood at the mouth of the alley, gray hair pinned in a tidy bun, a floral apron still dusted with flour. Right hand raised with a wooden cane, face fierce enough to stop a freight train. Ada, not grandma yet. Not the woman who would change his life. Back then, she was only a stranger with a cane and the righteous anger of someone who couldn't stand by while a child was being hurt. The boys scattered, the apple rolled across the ground, and behind Ada, peeking out from behind her, was a little girl. Tiny, maybe 4 or 5, wild curly hair, both arms squeezing a stuffed rabbit with worn-out ears. Her round eyes staring at the bruised boy on the ground with the pure, simple curiosity of a small child. Ada called her baby, always baby or my little one, never her real name in front of Marcus and to the 8-year-old bleeding beneath that brick wall. She was only the old woman's little girl, nameless, just a pair of big eyes watching him from behind a wooden cane. Ada took him back to her apartment, a small place above a grocery store at the end of the street. It smelled like soup and toasted bread, and something Marcus didn't have a name for yet. Safety, a scent he didn't realize he had forgotten until he breathed it in again. She fed him, bandaged the cuts on his face with gentle, steady hands, then laid him down on an old sofa covered with a faded crocheted blanket. The little girl crept up to the sofa, set her stuffed rabbit beside him, didn't say a word, just patted his hand once, then ran back to hide behind Ada's legs. "You can stay here as long as you need," Ada said, stroking his hair, and for the first time in 6 months. Marcus cried. She introduced herself as Miss Ada. Only that. No last name, no full address, no paperwork. And the 8-year-old didn't ask, because when you're hungry and cold and so alone, you've forgotten what it feels like for someone to care. Names don't matter. Only the hot bowl of soup and the hand in your hair matter. 3 months. Marcus stayed 3 months. The only 3 months in his entire life when he got to just be a normal kid. Ada taught him to read English properly, made him wash behind his ears every night, sat beside him telling stories until he fell asleep, and told him every single morning that he deserved to be loved. He called her grandma. She never corrected him, just smiled and patted his cheek. Then his uncle came back, ragged, thinner, eyes hollowed out, smelling like cheap liquor and old anger. He dragged Marcus out of the apartment by his thin arm, and Marcus screamed, reaching back toward the door that was closing. Toward Ada, standing on the stairs with silent tears on her cheeks. Toward the little girl clutching the stuffed rabbit and crying without understanding why. "I'll find you again, Grandma, I promise." That was the last time he saw her. The underworld swallowed the 8-year-old boy and spat out a monster. At 13, running errands for gangs. At 18, cleaning up after things that couldn't be undone. At 25, the shadow of New York, and through all of it, the boy inside never stopped searching. Marcus spent millions looking for a woman named Miss Ada, an older woman in Brooklyn raising a little granddaughter, living in an apartment above a grocery store. But the grocery store had been torn down long ago, turned into a convenience store, then a cafe, then an empty lot. And 3 years after Marcus left, Ada had briefly married a man named Thornton. The marriage didn't last, but she kept the new last name for reasons only she understood. Ada Mitchell vanished from every record. Ada Thornton appeared in a different neighborhood, a different part of the city, a different life. And the old woman's baby, the nameless little girl in Marcus's memory, grew up into Rose Thornton. Applied for a maid job at the Reed Mansion, under a last name Marcus had never heard, had never had any reason to connect to the woman he had been searching for his whole life. Fate, it turned out, wasn't cruel because it separated people. Fate was cruel because it placed them right beside each other, and didn't let them recognize it. Until a night of snow when a pipe burst in a nursing home, and a desperate young woman decided to break the one rule nobody ever dared break. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Marcus stood up slowly, like the gravity in the hallway had somehow doubled. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, a rough, quick gesture completely out of place with the polished control everyone associated with him. Took a deep breath, let it out slowly. When he exhaled, the 8-year-old vanished and the boss returned. But not exactly the way he'd been before. Something had shifted in his eyes, something softer, more complicated than coldness. Because a man with nothing to lose is frightening, but a man who has just found something to lose is something else entirely. Marcus turned to his head of security, the man who had ordered 6 guns pointed at Ada's chest only minutes earlier. The guard stood rigid, jaw clenched, trying to hold on to professionalism, but his eyes had already started darting sideways, searching for an exit. "You pointed a weapon at her." Marcus's voice wasn't loud. It never needed to be. The quieter he spoke in this mansion, the worse things got. "Boss, I didn't know. You're done." 2 words, no explanation, no second chance. The guard held Marcus's gaze for half a second. Read something in his eyes that made arguing feel like a very bad idea, then turned and walked away, footsteps getting faster with every step until he disappeared through the hall doors. Nobody looked after him. Marcus turned to the remaining guards, one by one. His gaze rested on each face long enough for them to understand. This wasn't a request. This wasn't a suggestion. This was the law. This woman is Grandma. She is untouchable. Anyone who disrespects her answers directly to me. Yes, boss. 6 voices. All at once, not a moment of hesitation, Marcus nodded, then turned back to Ada, and his voice changed completely. Softer, lighter, every word handled with care, like he was speaking to the most precious thing he had ever been allowed to touch. You'll stay in the main suite, Grandma, the biggest room upstairs. Ada looked at him, head tilted, half confused and half amused. Then waved a hand. Fine, but only because my back hurts. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. Then he turned to Rose. She was still sitting on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled up, eyes red, hands still shaking. She had watched every single thing that just happened, and still didn't fully understand where she fit in this story. An hour ago, she was just a maid. 10 minutes ago, she was sure she was about to die. And now the man who ran this empire was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. You're her granddaughter, he said. Not a question. That means your family. You're my little sister. You don't need to clean anymore. You both live here now. Anyone else would have fallen to their knees in gratitude, would have cried, would have nodded quietly and accepted the miracle that had just dropped into their lap. But Rose Thornton wasn't anyone else. Rose Thornton was a girl that life had taught over and over and over again that miracles didn't exist, and if they did, they always came with a bill. She stood up slowly, and instead of stepping forward, she stepped back 1 step, her eyes hardened, wet but hard, like steel that's been dipped in cold water. Don't, 1 word. Marcus stopped mid-movement. The entire hall, already quiet, went so still that Rose could hear the chandelier trembling faintly overhead. Don't call me family. Her voice shook, but not from fear. It trembled with feeling, and maybe for the first time in her life, anger was bigger than fear. Everyone who's ever called me family disappeared. My parents called me family, then they died when I was 4. The foster system called me family, then they sent me back 3 times before Grandma had to fight a courtroom just to keep me. Every landlord, every boss, every single person who ever said, "You're safe now," they all left. All of them. So don't stand there in your expensive suit and call me your sister like that word means something. Words are cheap, Mr. Reed, especially from men like you. The hall went dead. The guards, men who had watched Marcus make powerful people beg, were now doing everything they could not to breathe too loudly. Because nobody spoke to Marcus Reed like that. Not an enemy, not a partner, not anyone with enough power and guns to protect themselves after words like those. And this girl, this young woman in a dirty apron with red eyes, had just said it to his face without flinching once. Marcus looked at her for a long, long time, long enough for the whole hall to hold its breath. But what moved across his face wasn't anger, wasn't coldness. It was something only Rose might recognize, because she had seen it too many times in her own reflection. Understanding, the understanding of someone who had also been abandoned, who had also been fooled by promises, who had also learned the hard way not to believe. You're right, Marcus said. His voice was calm, no defensiveness. No edge, words are cheap, silence. Then he added quietly, almost just for her, then I won't use words, watch what I do. He turned his back and walked into the dark hallway. No explanation, no persuasion, no more promises, and before dawn the mansion transformed. The main suite was completely remade for Ada. An adjustable medical bed, a health alert system by the bedside, fresh flowers on the table. Curtains replaced with softer fabric, because Marcus remembered she had always liked natural morning light. Rose was moved into a guest room in the east wing, not because she agreed, not because she had forgiven anything, but because when she went back to the staff room to collect her things were already gone. Nobody asked her, nobody explained, action, not words, She stood in the new room as the sky started to get light. Looking around, this room was bigger than the mold. Sealed apartment in the Bronx, a wide bed, white sheets, windows facing a garden she hadn't even known the mansion had, and for the first time in 20 years, Rose Thornton didn't know whether she should stay afraid or start to hope. She chose to lock the door and slide a small knife under her pillow, because hope was a luxury she had never been able to afford. *****, 3 days passed, and the mansion began to change, in ways nobody, not even Marcus himself, could have predicted. On the morning of the third day, Marcus sat at the head of the 12-seat dining table, phone wedged between his shoulder and ear, voice carrying through the room with the familiar chill that everyone in this house had learned to live with. "I don't care if he's the governor's nephew or the president's nephew. Break his..." A wooden cane tapped his shoulder. Not hard, but firm enough to make the shadow of New York stop mid-sentence. Ada stood directly behind his chair. Gray hair pinned in a neat bun, the floral apron from the nursing home tied around her waist, left hand on the cane, right hand on her hip, and on her face. The expression that anyone who ever had a grandmother would recognize instantly. Total, absolute disapproval, language we're eating. The whole dining room froze. The butler, a man who had served this household for 15 years without ever changing his expression, stood by the silver cabinet with his eyes opened about 2 millimeters wider than usual, which, for him, was basically screaming in shock. 2 guards by the doors glanced at each other sideways without turning their heads, trying to process the fact that a 78-year-old woman weighing almost nothing had just cut off the boss. Mid-sentence, with a tap of her cane, Marcus set the phone down, didn't hang up, didn't apologize to whoever was on the other end. Just set it down, like a call worth millions of dollars had suddenly become less important than the look on this old woman's face. He rubbed his shoulder exactly where the cane had tapped, and said 2 words that nobody in that room, nobody in the entire underworld, had ever heard from him before. "Sorry, Grandma." Ada nodded, but she wasn't done, and sit up straight. "You look like a common thug." "Yes, Grandma." Marcus Reed, the man crime bosses from across the world spoke about with fear in their voices, straightened his back in the dining chair. On an old woman's command, Rose sat across the table, far enough to keep the distance she was still committed to, but close enough to see everything. She bit her lip hard, because if she didn't, she would laugh. And she wasn't ready to laugh in this house, not ready to admit that something here was actually making her want to. The butler, from his corner of the room, let the tiniest twitch touch the edge of his mouth before his face went back to stone. Rose saw it. At lunch that same day, Ada decided Marcus needed vegetables. A plate of steamed broccoli was set in front of him. Bright green, steaming, entirely not what the shadow of New York wanted after a 3-hour meeting with lawyers. He looked at the broccoli with the same expression he gave enemies, pure contempt, shoved the plate to the side. Reached for the beef tray. Ada pushed the broccoli back. Marcus pushed it away. Ada pushed it back. The third time, she didn't push anything. She just looked at him, only looked, eyes clouded but heavy. Heavy with 20 years of distance, with thousands of meals cooked at a table where the chairs were empty. With every night, she had set an extra plate out for a boy she didn't know had become a devil or a saint. Marcus picked up his fork and ate the entire plate of broccoli, 1 bite at a time, down to the last piece. Without a single word, Ada patted his cheek gently. "Good boy." And Marcus Reed, the shadow of New York, smiled. That afternoon, Ada discovered there was a guard posted outside her bedroom door all day. He was nearly 2 meters tall. Shoulders as wide as a door frame, face completely blank, arms crossed, standing still as a statue from morning to night. Ada opened the door, looked him up and down, then declared this completely unacceptable. "Sit down," she ordered. The guard blinked. "Ma'am, I'm on duty." "On duty for what?" "Standing there until your legs fall off. Sit down. I have cookies." The guard looked over his shoulder for help from anyone. Nobody stepped in. He sat in the chair Ada pulled out from inside her room. And before he could say another word, a plate of fresh cookies appeared on his lap. Ada had baked them that morning in the mansion kitchen, where Marcus's private chef had stood watching her take over his oven, with the bewildered face of a man who had just been quietly overthrown from his own kingdom. "Eat," Ada said firmly, "and call your mother. A mother always worries." The guard, a man who had once taken down 2 opponents at the same time in a fight, sat there eating cookies, and pulled out his phone to call his mother, on the orders of a 78-year-old woman he'd been assigned to protect. "Yes, Mom, I'm fine. Yes, I'm eating enough." Marcus walked down the hallway and stopped when he saw the scene outside Ada's door. A massive guard, sitting in a small chair, chewing a cookie, phone to his ear, talking to his mother in a quiet voice. Marcus stared, shook his head slowly, and almost laughed. In the days that followed, the mansion kept changing. In ways nobody ordered and nobody could stop. The staff started calling Ada Grandma, too, not because Marcus made them. Not out of fear, but because she treated every single person in this house like family. She remembered the chef's name, asked about the gardener's daughter, scolded the night guard for not dressing warmly enough when standing outside. For the very first time in the history of this mansion, it smelled like cookies baking at 4 in the afternoon. For the very first time, there was real laughter in the dining room, not the kind from stories about enemies falling, but because Ada told a story from her youth and forgot she'd already told it twice. Rose watched all of it from the outside. She still kept her distance, still locked her door every night, still called Marcus Mr. Raid with cold politeness, still didn't want to owe anyone anything but the wall she had built over 20 years, a wall made from every abandonment, every broken promise, every door slammed in her face. That wall was cracking. She could feel it. She hated the feeling, because every time a wall like that cracked, what rushed in was always pain. Peace, it turned out, was the most fragile thing in the world. *****, 2 in the morning. The mansion was sunk in silence and darkness, the heavy kind, the kind that comes from walls too thick and secrets too many. Rose lay in the wide bed in the east wing, eyes open, fixed on the ceiling, unable to sleep. She'd tried everything. Counting sheep, slowing her breathing, squeezing her eyes shut, pretending she was back in the old apartment above the grocery store, where street sounds from Brooklyn and the smell of soup from Ada's kitchen were all she ever needed to fall asleep. But this room was too big, too quiet, too clean, and every time she started drifting off, the image of 6 red laser dots on Ada's chest yanked her back awake. She pushed herself up, feet on the cold wooden floor, decided to get a glass of water. The small knife under her pillow was still there. Tonight, she didn't take it with her. She didn't know if that was progress or just exhaustion. The downstairs hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of motion sensors along the baseboards. Rose turned the corner toward the kitchen and stopped. The kitchen lights were on, and something smelled like it was burning. She stepped into the doorway and blinked twice, because she was not sure what she was looking at. Marcus Raid stood in the middle of the kitchen, a wooden spoon in his hand and in front of him. A total disaster. Oats dusted across the marble counter. A milk carton tipped over near the sink, half of it spilled out, eggshells on the floor and on the stove. A pot of porridge boiling so violently it was turning brown, a suspicious wrong shade of brown that porridge should never be. The shadow of New York, the man the whole underworld feared, was losing to a pot of porridge. Are you cooking? Rose heard her own voice before she decided to speak. Marcus didn't turn around. He just stared at the burnt pot with an expression Rose had never seen on his face before. Helplessness, not the helplessness of a man facing danger, the helplessness of a man trying to do something gentle. With hands that only knew how to be rough. She used to make this for me when I couldn't sleep, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying to remember how. Rose stood there in the doorway, and for a few seconds she didn't see the boss, didn't see the shadow, didn't see the man she had been telling herself to be careful around. She saw the boy with the sad eyes, the one Ada had talked about, the one who slept on the sofa in that little apartment and woke every morning to the smell of warm porridge. The boy the underworld had stolen before he even finished learning how to be a child. She was quiet for one more second. Then she walked into the kitchen, pulled the burnt pot off the stove, set it into the sink, grabbed a clean pot from the hanging rack, and said without looking at him, "Move, you're going to burn the whole place down." Marcus looked at her. Rose didn't look back, but she felt his gaze on her spine, heavy and warm at the same time. He stepped aside, and for the first time since she'd been in this house, he listened without arguing. Rose knew the recipe by heart. Of course she did. Ada had taught her to make this porridge back when Rose still had to stand on a chair to reach the stove. Rolled oats, not the quick kind, warm milk, not boiling, a pinch of salt, a little honey, and the secret Ada said only the two of them knew. A tiny pinch of cinnamon, just enough to smell it, not enough to taste it outright. She walked Marcus through each step. Stir in one direction, steady hands, not too fast. He followed with complete focus, like this was the most important task of his entire life. And maybe in that moment it was. They stood side by side at the stove, watching the porridge simmer in soft, slow bubbles. The first time they had done something together without fear, without distance, without the invisible wall between them. Just two people, one pot, and the memory of a woman sleeping upstairs. Marcus watched the surface of the porridge and said so quietly that Rose had to lean a little closer, "I spent 20 years building all of this. An empire, power, fear. Do you know what all of that is actually worth?" He didn't wait for her to answer, nothing. "I would trade every single piece of it to get those 3 months back, in the apartment above the grocery store." Rose didn't answer right away. She turned off the stove, ladled the porridge into a bowl, stood there for a moment with the ladle in her hand, staring at the steam rising off it, thinking of all the nights Ada had sat alone in that small apartment, talking about the boy she had lost. "She talked about you," Rose said. "She called you the boy with the sad eyes." Marcus didn't speak. His jaw tightened, but his eyes that had seen the worst things human beings could do to each other, started to shimmer under the kitchen light. Rose set the bowl down on the counter. She walked toward the door, and when she reached the threshold, one hand resting on the frame, she stopped. She didn't turn around. Marcus. For the first time, she said his name. Not Mr. Reed, not Sir, just his name, plain and bare, like the wall between them had lowered just enough for her to step over it. If only for a moment, she didn't set an extra plate at Christmas. Silence. Rose swallowed. She set an extra plate every night for 20 years. Then she left. Left him standing alone in that huge kitchen, with the pot of porridge and that knowledge that somewhere in this world there had been a woman who hadn't given up on him. Not with money or power or an army of people looking for him, but with one extra plate on the table every night, meal after meal, year after year, until dementia came and stole even the memory of why she was doing it. The next morning, Ada woke up and found a bowl of hot porridge on her bedside table, the right recipe. A little too salty, but right. She didn't remember who made it, didn't remember why it was there, but she smiled, lifted it, and ate every last spoonful. Rose stood outside the room, watching through the crack of the half-open door, and thought that maybe, just maybe, this time the word family meant something different. Asterisk, 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 a week passed. If anyone had looked at the Reed mansion from the outside, they would never have believed it belonged to the man who ran the underworld. Ada had established a daily routine with the firm authority of a general. In the morning, she sat in the garden on the stone bench under the maple tree, talked to the gardener about how to prune roses properly. In the afternoon, she settled into an armchair in the grand living room, feet propped up on a footstool Marcus had someone bring in because she said her ankles swelled. At night, she told stories to anyone willing to sit and listen. Usually Rose, sometimes the night guard, and occasionally Marcus himself, sitting quietly in the corner of the sofa. listening to stories he had heard 20 years ago, and pretending each time like it was the first. Everything was almost normal, almost peaceful, almost enough for Rose to start believing that maybe life wouldn't snatch back what it had just given her. That afternoon, Rose carried a cup of chamomile tea into the living room, the kind Ada loved most, brewed at the right temperature with just the right amount of honey. The exact way Ada herself had taught her when she was small, still standing on a chair to reach the kettle. She set the cup on the small table beside the armchair, sat on the floor by Ada's feet, easy and relaxed, the way she had every afternoon this past week, like it was something they had always done, and not something that had only just begun 7 days ago. "Here's your tea, Grandma, the kind you like." Ada took the cup in both hands, careful and gentle. She looked at the tea. Then she looked at Rose, and in that moment nothing on the surface changed, no sound, no movement. Only the light in Ada's eyes, the light Rose had known every single day of her life, the light that said, "I know you. I love you, you are my whole world." That light went out, not slowly, not gradually, like someone had flipped a switch. "Thank you, sweetheart, you're very kind." Ada's voice was warm, polite, the way you are warm to a stranger you meet on a bus. Not the way you are warm to the granddaughter you have raised since she was 4. That voice went through Rose like something cold and sharp. "Grandma, I'm sorry. Do I know you? Are you one of the new maids, dear?" The world stopped, not like a saying. The world truly stopped for Rose in that moment. The clock on the wall kept ticking. She couldn't hear it. The afternoon sunlight still came through the curtains. She couldn't see it. She saw only Ada's eyes. Eyes she had looked into every single day of her life, now looking back at her with the polite curiosity of a stranger. Rose opened her mouth. She wanted to say, "Grandma, it's me. It's Rose, your granddaughter. You raised me. You taught me how to make porridge and braid hair and love books. You stood in a courtroom and said you would not let anyone take me away. You were everything I have." But no sound came out. Her throat locked up, like an invisible hand squeezing it shut. All she could make was a small, broken sound, like something cracking. Ada looked at her with the kindest eyes. But it was the kindness of a neighbor, not the kindness of a grandmother. She reached out and patted Rose's hand. A polite, consoling pat, the kind with no weight of 20 years of love behind it. "You seem like such a sweet girl. Can you tell me where this is? I think I'm supposed to be somewhere else." Rose set the tea down on the table. Her hands shook so hard the cup clinked against the saucer. She stood up slowly. Carefully, like if she moved too fast, she would shatter right there on the living room floor. She stepped out into the hallway, closed the door behind her as softly as she could, because even in the worst moment, Rose still didn't want to startle her. Then she leaned her back against the wall, slid down to the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, forehead buried in her arms. And her shoulders began to shake. No noise, no sobbing, no wailing, none of the sounds that movies show you when someone is in pain. Only her shoulders trembling, her breath breaking apart, and tears soaking into her sleeves, because losing her parents was something Rose had already learned to carry. She lost them when she was too young to remember. That grief was like an old scar, always there, but no longer bleeding. But losing Ada, losing her in pieces, day by day, moment by moment, watching the light in her eyes go out and come back and go out again. Losing her while she was still right there, still breathing, still smiling, still drinking her chamomile tea with both hands wrapped around the cup. But looking at Rose like a total stranger, that was a kind of pain nobody had prepared her for. Nobody had taught her how to survive being forgotten. By the one person who had always remembered her, Marcus walked down the hallway. He was on his way to his office, phone buzzing constantly. There was always something that needed handling. He stopped when he saw Rose on the floor. Then he looked through the living room glass. Saw Ada sitting in the armchair, eyes moving around the room with the polite confusion of a guest visiting someone else's home for the first time. She was in the very room she had turned into her own living room for an entire week, and she didn't recognize it. Marcus didn't say anything, because there were no right words. No sentence in the world could make this moment hurt less. He did the only thing he could. He sat down on the floor next to Rose, back against the wall, legs stretched out, shoulder close enough to nearly touch hers. The two of them sat in silence, not speaking, not looking at each other, just sitting side by side on cold stone, sharing a pain that no money, no power, no empire could ever fix. After a long while, Rose spoke. Her voice was broken. "She's disappearing, Marcus, a little more every day, and I can't do anything." Marcus was quiet for a beat. Then he said softly, in the voice of someone who was hurting too, but had learned how to stand inside the hurt, "Then we make sure every day she has left is worth remembering, even if she won't remember them." 20 minutes later, Ada's voice rang through the living room, clear and sharp as a bell. "Rose, Rose, where did you go? My tea's gone cold." Rose wiped her eyes on her sleeve, stood up, took one breath, then walked back into the living room with a smile she hoped nobody could see through. Ada looked up, and this time the light was back, bright, warm, full of love, like the last 20 minutes had never happened. "Well, don't just stand there. Sit down and get the cookies out." Rose sat beside her, took her hand, held it tighter than usual, because she knew a day was coming when she would hold Ada's hand and nothing would squeeze back. A day the light would go out and not come on again. A day Ada would look at her with that polite, faraway distance and never find her way back. But that day wasn't today. Today, Grandma was still here, and sometimes today is enough. Asterisk, 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 30 minutes from the Reed mansion. In a dim bar on a Brooklyn Street corner, with no sign and no listing on any map. A man sat in a corner booth with torn leather seats, back against the wall, one leg up on the opposite seat. Lifting a glass of whiskey to the light, his name was Victor Webb. The underworld called him the Jackal. He was the kind of man you never wanted to know by name, because if you knew his, it meant he'd known yours for a very long time. And that never ended well for anyone. His smile was wide, even, perfect teeth, almost charming, but if you looked closely, it never reached his eyes. Those eyes were cold, calculating, patient, the eyes of someone who could wait months just to find one small crack in an opponent's armor. And tonight, he had just found Marcus Reed's crack. On the table in front of him, between the whiskey and the ashtray, lay a stack of surveillance photos. Black and white, slightly blurry, taken from far away with a long lens, but clear enough to show everything that mattered. The first photo, Marcus helping a gray-haired old woman out of a car at the mansion gate, his hand under her elbow. So gentle, so careful, like he was afraid she might break. The second photo, Marcus walking beside her in the garden, head slightly bowed, listening to her, his face so soft it was almost impossible to believe this was the same man who had forced 3 powerful crime bosses out of the city in the past year. The third photo, Marcus sitting on the garden bench, the old woman patting his cheek, and him, the shadow, the man the whole underworld whispered about, smiling. Victor tapped his finger on that third photo, slow and steady, like a countdown clock. So the shadow has a heart after all. His man across the table, big, thick-necked eyes that never quite got there, stared at the photos and asked, "Who is she?" Victor tilted his head, took a slow sip of whiskey, set the glass down with the precise care of a man who had practiced every single gesture until it looked effortless. "Does it matter? Marcus hasn't let anyone close in 20 years. No wife, no lover, no friends. No family. 20 years living like a shadow, and a shadow has no weakness." He tapped the photo again, right on the old woman's face, but this woman is leverage. The word left Victor's mouth as lightly as smoke, but its weight was enough to drop the temperature in that bar by a few degrees. Leverage, in the underworld's language, that meant a weapon. It meant a hostage. It meant the thing you used to break a man who couldn't be broken any other way. Victor gathered the photos, slid them into an envelope, and stood. The smile stayed on his face, cold. Patient, he wasn't in a hurry. A good predator is never in a hurry. They watch, they wait, they let the prey feel completely safe. Then they strike, Asterisk, 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 30 minutes away, back at the mansion, Rose was starting to notice something was wrong. Not a feeling she could explain, not supernatural, just the eyes of a girl who had spent her whole life in uncertainty. Eyes that had learned long ago to scan every single room for an exit before sitting down. Eyes that noticed what other people walked right past. The black car, it was parked across the street, about 50 meters from the mansion gate, far enough not to look suspicious. Close enough to see everyone going in and out. The first day, she figured it belonged to someone in the neighborhood. The second day, she started to notice it was still there. Same position, different driver. The third day, when she looked out the living room window and saw it again. A third driver in 3 days, but same posture, same angle of the seat, same steady gaze fixed straight on the gate. She knew that evening, Rose poured tea for Marcus in his office. A new routine she had started after the porridge night. Not because anyone asked her to, just because she wanted to, but her hands were trembling. Tea spilled onto the saucer. Marcus was reading documents but noticed immediately. Because whatever else he was a man who had survived 20 years in the underworld by never missing a detail. "What is it? There's a car watching the house." Rose spoke quickly, like if she slowed down, she'd lose her nerve. A black car across the street, 3 days in a row, different drivers each time, but they all sit the same way, look the same way. Marcus's face changed. Not dramatically, not in a way just anyone would catch, but Rose had started to learn the small movements in that face. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, his shoulders dropped half a centimeter like his body had shifted into fight mode on its own. He set the papers down, walked to the window, looked out for exactly 2 seconds, then picked up his phone and dialed one number. Run the plate, black car, northeast corner now. He hung up without waiting for a reply, because in Marcus Reed's world now meant now. Not a minute later, the result came back in 15 minutes. The car was registered to a transport company no one had ever heard of. That company was owned by another company, that one by another, and when the chain was traced all the way to the end. The name that appeared was one Marcus recognized instantly, Victor Webb. Marcus set the phone down on the desk. Slowly, his jaw clenched so hard Rose could see the muscles at his temples flex. He didn't speak for a long time. Just stood there staring out the window into the dark. At the car, he now knew exactly who it belonged to. The next morning, Marcus moved before the sun came up. Security doubled. New cameras covering every blind spot. Ada's path through the mansion rewritten to keep her away from windows. Away from anywhere she could be seen from outside. The night shift reinforced with 4 more guards. All of them men Marcus trusted with something more than money. Everything tightened until even the butler had to swipe his card twice to get to the 2nd floor. None of it mattered at 7 in the morning. When Ada woke up and decided she was going into the garden, she had a schedule. She needed to sit on the stone bench under the maple tree. She needed to talk to the roses, and nobody, not even the shadow of New York, could stop a 78. Old woman once she'd made up her mind. Rose went out first to check, a duty she had assigned herself the moment she learned someone was watching. She stepped into the garden in the early morning light, her breath turning to thin ribbons of smoke in the cold air. Eyes sweeping the flower beds, the fence line, the stone bench, and she saw it, on the bench where Ada sat every single morning. Placed right in the center of the seat was a single white daisy, fresh, neatly cut, clearly not from this garden, and beneath it a small piece of paper folded in half. Rose bent down, hands already trembling slightly. Opened it, 4 words, written in slanted, unhurried handwriting, the kind that belongs to someone with all the time in the world. "The garden's lovely, Grandma." Rose's blood went cold, not as a saying. She truly felt it stop for a moment. Like her heart forgot to beat for one single breath. Someone had gotten past the fence, past the cameras, past the security team that had been reinforced less than 12 hours ago. had stood in the exact spot where Ada sat every morning, knew exactly where she sat, knew exactly when, and left this behind, not as a blunt threat, but as a whisper. I can come in whenever I want, and next time I won't leave only a flower. Rose shoved the daisy and the note into her coat pocket. Heart hammering, but hands no longer shaking, she went straight back inside, straight to Marcus's office. Knocked once and entered without waiting, set the flower and the note on his desk without a word. Marcus looked at the white daisy, looked at the paper, read the 4 words, and his reaction scared Rose more than any explosion of anger ever could. He didn't explode, didn't slam the desk, didn't raise his voice. He went quiet, completely quiet. The kind of quiet Rose had learned in 10 days in this house was the most dangerous kind. The quiet of a man calculating not whether to act, but how. Double the perimeter, he said, his voice flat as frozen ground. Nobody goes in or out without my eyes on them. That night, after Ada was asleep and the mansion had settled into the quiet of the night shift, Marcus sat in his office. The desk lamp threw deep shadows under his eyes. He was rereading security reports when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, no name, no familiar area code. Marcus stared at the screen for 2 seconds, then answered. Silence 1 second, 2, 3. Then a voice came through, smooth, slow, leisurely. The voice of a man savoring something expensive while someone else was bleeding. Marcus Reed, it's been a while, Webb. 1 word, he didn't need to ask. He had known that voice before Victor even spoke. Because there was only one man in New York bold enough, patient enough, dangerous enough to play this game. I like what you've done with the place. The flowers in the garden are a nice touch. Ada seems to enjoy them. Silence. Marcus's grip tightened around the phone, tight enough that the casing creaked under his knuckles. Victor had said her name. Not the old woman, not the lady. Ada, her real name, which meant he didn't just know where she was. He knew who she was. What do you want? What I've always wanted. The Eastport contracts. Everything north of 42nd Street. You know the terms. And if I refuse? Victor laughed. Light, brief, almost pleasant. The kind of laugh you hear at a dinner party, not the laugh of a man threatening someone's family. And that pleasantness was exactly what made it terrifying. Then I suppose I'll have to pay Grandma a visit. I hear she makes excellent cookies. The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down on the desk, slowly. His eyes stared at the space in front of him, but Rose, standing just outside the office door, had heard everything. She had been on her way to bring his evening tea, and now she stood there holding the tray. She pushed the door open, set the tea on the desk, and said, I got to the flower before Grandma saw it. She doesn't know. Good. Keep it that way. A beat of silence. Then Rose said something she hadn't planned to say, something she didn't know was coming until she heard her own voice. Whatever you're planning, you don't have to do it alone. Marcus looked at her, not the protective look he gave Ada, not the boss look he gave his men, a look of respect. The look of a man recognizing that the person in front of him didn't need saving. She needed to be trusted. I know 2 words, but inside those 2 words, Rose heard something she had only ever heard from one person before. From Ada, an acknowledgement that she mattered, not because she was Ada's granddaughter, not because he owed Ada anything, but because Rose Thornton, who had chosen to stay and face this instead of run, deserved to stand beside him in whatever came next. Outside the window, the black car sat at the northeast corner, dark inside, still watching, but inside the mansion for the first time in 20 years. Marcus Reed wasn't facing the dark alone. Asterisk, 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 Marcus called Ada and Rose into his office at 9 that night, after the security team finished their report. After every door had been checked for the 3rd time that day. He stood behind his desk, not sitting, because what he was about to say needed to be said standing up. With his full weight behind every word, Ada sat in the armchair he had brought into the office for her the week before, her wooden cane propped beside her, back straight, eyes bright. One of the good days dementia allowed her to keep all of herself. Rose stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of the chair. She knew before Marcus even opened his mouth. She wasn't going to like what was coming, because his face held the expression of a man who had already made a decision, and had no intention of discussing it. Tonight, I'm taking both of you out. A safe house upstate. My team will go with you. You stay there until I finish this. He spoke in the voice the whole underworld had learned not to challenge. Flat, final, no space for questions. This was not an offer. It was an order. The wooden cane struck the floor. One sharp tap. No. Ada said it, and that one word filled the entire room. Grandma, these men, no. The second time stronger. The cane struck again, like she was stamping her decision into something that couldn't be erased. And anyone who had spent more than a day in this mansion already knew what 2 taps of that cane meant. It didn't matter if you were the shadow of New York or the president of the world. The argument was over before it started. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. He stepped out from behind the desk, dropped to his knees in front of her chair, took her hands in both of his, and looked straight into her eyes with a plea that nobody alive had ever seen on his face before. Except her. Grandma, please, these people are dangerous. They will use you to get to me. I can't let that happen. I can't. His voice cracked at the end, splitting like a thin piece of ice over rushing water beneath. Ada looked at him. Her cloudy eyes, the ones dementia was stealing piece by piece every single day. In this moment, turned so clear it was almost painful to see. She held his hands in both of hers, wrinkled palms pressing tight, and spoke in a voice that didn't shake, didn't waver, the voice of a woman who had lived 78 years. Lost enough to know exactly what she was willing to lose again, and what she wasn't. I lost you once already. I spent 20 years thinking you were gone forever. I am not leaving you again. They'll use you, then you'd better make sure they don't succeed. She squeezed his hands, the cane tapped the floor once more. Gentler this time, not a command, a vow. I didn't raise a boy who knows how to run, and I am certainly not the one who runs. Marcus opened his mouth to argue again. But before he could find the words, Rose spoke from behind the chair. I'm staying too. Marcus looked at her. She stood straight, arms at her sides, her shoulders no longer curved inward the way they had on her first day in this house. She no longer dropped her head to avoid his gaze, no longer let her voice shake when she spoke to him. The girl who had said, "Don't call me family," 2 weeks ago, was standing in a crime boss's office, saying she would stay and face a threat that even paid guards would think twice about. "You're both insane," Marcus said. But there was no anger in it, only something close to astonishment, mixed with the helpless dawning realization that he could command an entire empire and still could not command these 2 women. "We learned from the best," Rose said. And the corner of her mouth twitched, half a smile, half a challenge. Ada looked from Rose to Marcus and back again, nodded slowly, satisfied, like this was exactly the answer she had been hoping for. Marcus stood up, looked at both of them, one old and one young, one losing her memory, one finally starting to find her trust. And he understood he had lost this argument before it ever began. He accepted it, not because he agreed, but because he was beginning to know these 2 women, and both of them were the kind of people who would not change their minds even if the whole sky fell. He did what he could. Elite guards posted around the clock, escape routes mapped for every possible situation, weapons hidden in every part of the mansion, an emergency communication system, the safe room in the basement checked and switched back on. All of it done with the thoroughness of a man who had spent his whole life preparing for the worst. But deep down, in the place he never let anyone see, he knew that if Victor Webb chose to move, defense alone wouldn't be enough. Victor wasn't the kind of enemy who attacked when you were ready. He was the kind who attacked when you were laughing. Asterisk, 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 the next night's dinner. The dining room bright with warm light. The smell of roasted meat and potatoes. 3 plates on a table built for 12, but only 3 people at one end close together. Ada told stories from long ago, her voice lively and clear. One of the good evenings where dementia let her keep every piece of herself. "Do you know how many times this boy?" She pointed her fork at Marcus. "I stole cookies from my kitchen. I hid them in a tin on the highest shelf. Every single morning, 2 were missing. I thought I had a ghost thief until I caught him under the kitchen table, mouth full of crumbs, looking up at me with the guiltiest eyes I had ever seen in my life. Marcus laughed. Really laughed, not a polite smile, not a quiet huff, a real laugh from somewhere deep, the laugh of an 8-year-old boy stealing cookies. The laugh 20 years in the underworld hadn't been able to fully kill. Rose laughed too, and her laughter mixed with his and with Ada's storytelling. Until the room held a sound this mansion had never held before. The sound of family, the most perfect moment. 3 people at a table, warm light, hot food, real laughter, and the fragile, beautiful belief that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Then the first window exploded. Glass everywhere, the blast. Or maybe they happened at the same exact time, but Rose's brain processed the image before the sound. The dining room window erupting into 1,000 sharp pieces, crystal hail spraying into the room, each fragment catching the chandelier light for a fraction of a second. Before the chandelier shattered too, the whole room dropped into darkness, lit only by brief, strobing flashes from outside. Marcus moved before Rose could even understand what was happening. One hand flipped the dining table, plates and glasses flying, heavy oak crashing onto its side as a shield, while his other hand pulled both Ada and Rose down to the floor. Using his own body as a wall between the 2 women and whatever was coming through those windows, chandelier fragments rained down onto his back. Rose heard them hit. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, only pressed them lower against the cold stone. Breach north and east. A guard shouted from the main hall, sharp, professional, then his voice cut off mid-sentence. That sudden silence was more terrifying than any scream. Marcus looked over the edge of the overturned table, eyes sweeping fast, his mind doing in 1 second what took other men 5 minutes, multiple entry points at once. Not a quick hit, not a rushed in and out. This was military planning, every angle measured, every second accounted for. 10 to 12 attackers, split into small units, coming from at least 3 directions. His security was caught off guard not because he didn't have enough men, but because the enemy knew exactly where the blind spots were, knew exactly which shift was thinnest, knew exactly when all 3 of them would be sitting by those windows. Victor Webb hadn't come to threaten. He had come to finish it. Move. Marcus yanked Ada up, one arm across her waist, his other hand locked around Rose's wrist. He pulled them both out of the dining room through a side door into the west corridor. The corridor was full of smoke. Not fire smoke, the white, burning kind from a flashbang grenade thrown into the main hall. It forced Rose to squeeze her eyes shut and run on pure instinct. Following Marcus's grip like a lifeline, Ada coughed, her small body shaking with every breath, but her feet kept moving. Her cane striking the stone floor 3 times faster than normal. Marcus guided them through the smoke like he could see right through it. Left right, through a door Rose had never even known existed, down a short flight of stairs, and stopped at a wall that looked completely ordinary. He pressed his palm to one section of it. A panel slid open, revealing a biometric scanner and a number pad. The safe room, thick steel door, reinforced concrete walls, its own fresh air supply, a private line to the police and a rapid response unit. Marcus had built it for this exact night. Get in, now. Rose lunged forward, pulling Ada with her. But Ada stopped at the threshold, in the chaos and the smoke and the flashes. Her eyes suddenly sharpened. Like dementia had stepped back just far enough to give her all of herself, for this one moment, the most important one. She looked at Marcus, at the way he faced the corridor instead of stepping inside with them, at the gun in his hand. And she understood, you're not coming in with us. It wasn't a question. I'll be right behind you, Grandma. Ada looked into his eyes, and in that look lived 20 years of loss, 20 years of longing, 20 years of setting one extra plate on the table every night. All of it pressed into one single second. A second she knew might be the last time she ever saw the boy with the sad eyes. She knew he was lying. She had raised him for 3 months, and she had known from the very first week. He was never good at lying. Marcus. Her voice trembled for the first time all night, not because she was afraid for herself, but because she was afraid for him. Please, you cannot lose me again. He had said those same words to her. But now the meaning was completely reversed. She couldn't lose him. They were both speaking the same terror. Just with different words, Dorothy held his gaze one more second, then stepped into the safe room, and every step sounded like something breaking inside her. Marcus turned to the control panel outside the steel door, hit the activation button. Nothing happened. He hit it again. The panel flashed red. System error. He tried the backup. Same thing. Red light pulsing. Lock mechanism damaged. The steel door wouldn't close. The safe room wasn't safe. Rose watched from inside. Saw the red light blinking. Saw Marcus's face change. Saw his eyes, the ones that had stayed controlled through everything tonight, fill for the very first time with something that looked like desperation. No, 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 no. Footsteps thundered from the far end of the corridor, many, fast, organized, closing in. Marcus looked into the safe room, looked at Ada, gripping Rose's hand, looked at the two women he had sworn to protect, standing in a useless steel box with a door that wouldn't lock. Then he turned his back to them, faced the dark corridor, checked his gun, counted. Not enough. He knew it wasn't enough. Stay behind me. 4 dark figures turned the corner at once, moving with the precision of men who had drilled this exact formation hundreds of times. Weapons raised at eye level, footsteps nearly silent on the stone. Victor Webb's top people, not cheap hired hands. Men paid to make sure the job was done, and tonight the job was Marcus Reed. Marcus fired the first shot before the lead man could even see him in the darkness. The first shooter dropped, slammed into the wall, slid to the floor. The second went right after, turning halfway before collapsing face down. The remaining 2 split instantly, one behind a stone column, one in a doorway frame, both firing back. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor in broken frames, like a film skipping, stone walls cracking, dust falling, debris flying through the air. Marcus pressed himself to the wall, using the edge of the safe room doorway as cover. Firing back, counting inside his head, 2 shots, 3, 4, not enough, never enough for tonight. A bullet grazed his right shoulder, ripped his jacket, cut a line across skin, pain like a red, hot bar of iron pressed against him. But Marcus Reed had been enduring pain since he was 8 years old in a Brooklyn alley, and pain only made him sharper. More awake, more dangerous, he didn't stop. The 2 remaining shooters traded fire, pinning him down. And Marcus understood they were buying time, waiting for more men, waiting for the moment he ran out of ammunition. When that happened, this corridor would become a dead end for all 3 of them. Then he heard the sound he was most afraid of. The tap of a wooden cane on stone, slow, certain, coming from behind him. He turned and saw Ada step out of the safe room. Back straight, cane raised to shoulder height, a fragile 78, old woman barely over 100 pounds, walking through the open space between Marcus and the gun barrels of the shooters, with the absolute calm of someone crossing a living room to get a cup of tea. She stopped in the middle of the passage, directly between Marcus and the weapons pointed at him, her eyes clouded, yet burning with a fire that dementia could never touch. The same fire she had carried the day she stood at the mouth of a Brooklyn alley with this very cane, and shouted down the boys who were hurting a little boy she didn't even know yet, the fire of a mother protecting her child. "You will not touch my son." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every single word rang through that corridor with the weight of every meal she had ever cooked. Every night she had stayed awake, every extra plate she had set on the table, every prayer she had sent into the dark for the boy she thought was gone forever. The 2 shooters froze, not because they were afraid of an old woman with a cane, because they were shocked. Because no training, no manual, no scenario in the world prepares you for a gray-haired woman in a floral dress stepping into the middle of a gunfight and telling you that you are not allowed to touch her son. 1 second of hesitation, only 1 second. The single second that professional killers stopped to process something that wasn't in the plan. And 1 second was enough for Marcus Reed. He exploded from cover, surged forward with a speed his wounded shoulder should have stolen, but couldn't. Because the distance between him and those gun barrels aimed at Ada was only a few steps, and in those few steps lived 20 years he hadn't been able to protect her. 20 years he'd believed she was dead. 20 years compressed into force behind every single step. He took down the first shooter in close combat, knocked the weapon away in one motion. The second swung his barrel toward Marcus. Marcus lunged to shield Ada, his own body as cover. The bullet hit his left shoulder, not a graze, a real hit. The impact spun him halfway around. His left arm went completely numb, dropping to his side like it no longer belonged to him. But his right hand still worked, and his right hand was enough to take down the second shooter before the man could fire again. Marcus didn't see the third one. The first shooter he had disarmed had managed to get back up, staggered to his feet, found his weapon, and was now standing at the far end of the corridor, with a clear line straight into Marcus's back. Marcus didn't know, Ada didn't see. Nobody saw except Rose. She stood in the safe room doorway, watching everything. Ada stepping out, Marcus charging, the bullet hitting his shoulder, and now she saw the shooter at the end of the hall. Lift his weapon, aim at the back of the man who was holding her grandmother with the only arm he still had. She didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't stop to weigh anything. Her hand grabbed the ceramic vase on the shelf, just inside the safe room door. Something decorative, probably worth a lot of money. She threw it. The vase flew down the corridor and shattered right beside the shooter's head. Ceramic pieces spraying everywhere, making him stumble, lose his balance, lose his aim for one decisive instant. "Don't you dare," Rose screamed it, standing at the threshold of the safe room. No weapon, chest heaving. Hair loose, eyes blazing with the same fire Ada had carried seconds before. Because courage, it turned out, can be passed down. Not through blood, but through love, through 20 years of being raised by a woman who never, ever backed down. Marcus finished the last shooter in that moment of distraction, and then the corridor went quiet, truly quiet. No blasts, no footsteps, no shouting, only the harsh breathing of 3 living people, 3 hearts still beating, 3 pieces of a chosen family that had refused to break. Marcus staggered back toward Ada, left arm hanging limp, left shoulder soaked through, face pale under the dim emergency lights. "Are you hurt?" Ada lifted both hands, cradled his face in her palms, wrinkled hands pressing gently to his cheeks, and looked at him with eyes full of tears. And not a trace of fear. "You were shot because of me, always," Marcus whispered, his voice thin as thread, but with a tired, peaceful smile at the corners of his mouth. "Always, Grandma." Then his knees buckled. His eyes closed, and Marcus Reed's world went dark. Asterisk, 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 the first thing Marcus noticed wasn't pain. It was smell, antiseptic, layered underneath oatmeal porridge, the kind made just right, warm milk. The tiniest pinch of cinnamon, the kind only 2 people in the world knew how to make. Someone had cooked for him. He opened his eyes slowly, lids heavy as stone, light poured in, morning sunlight slipping through thin curtains and falling across white sheets. Across his left arm, wrapped carefully from shoulder to elbow. Across the Roman 4-line taped to the back of his right hand. He was in his own bedroom, but it had been turned into a recovery room. Medical equipment he was certain hadn't been here yesterday. One clear thought cut through the haze of pain and painkillers. Where is Ada? He tried to sit up. Pain tore through his left shoulder like something splitting apart. Forced him back into the pillow with a sound he couldn't hold back. "You're awake." Rose's voice, he looked. She was sitting in a chair pulled right up next to the bed, knees tucked up, dark shadows under her eyes. Hair twisted into a quick bun, still in the same clothes from last night, just wiped clean of dust and glass. She looked like someone who hadn't slept since the attack. Maybe she hadn't. "Grandma," he asked, on the first floor. Rose said, her voice almost flat with disbelief. Teaching your chef how to season food properly. She paused. She refused to leave the house, said if she left, you'd do something stupid. Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them, something like relief moved slowly across his face. She was still here. She was safe. She was scolding the chef. Somehow that meant the world was still holding together. Webb, he asked. That one word carrying the weight of everything. The white daisy, the phone call, the pleasant laugh. The windows exploding, the bullet in his body. Rose met his eyes and answered with a calm that felt remarkable coming from her. Your people found him 3 hours after the attack. He's not a problem anymore. Marcus nodded once. Slow and final. Didn't ask for details. Didn't need them. In his world, not a problem anymore, was the most complete answer there was. And the underworld would understand the message beneath it. Anyone who touched Marcus Reed's family would find that not even the darkest places could hide them. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, uneven, braided with the familiar tap of a wooden cane on each step. Rose stood and opened the door. Ada came in carrying a tray of soup. Cane tucked under one arm, her face holding 3 things at once: worry when she saw the bandaged shoulder, relief when she saw his eyes open, and anger bigger than both of those combined. You got shot, Marcus, shot, because you ran straight toward the danger like you were. Her voice cracked. Her lips trembled, tears rising in eyes already clouded by age, and when she finished the sentence, the last word didn't come out as anger at all. It came out as fear, like you were some kind of hero. She set the tray down on the nightstand with shaking hands, then sat on the edge of the bed, and in that moment she looked exactly her age. Not the woman with the cane who had chased bullies out of a Brooklyn alley. Not the woman who had stepped into a gunfight and told men with weapons they could not touch her son. Just a grandmother, old, tired, terrified, and loving someone so deeply that the fear of losing them again was bigger than any fear of dying. I cannot lose you again, she whispered. Not when I just found you. Marcus reached out with his right arm, the only one that still worked, and took her hand, that hand, the hand that had done things the world would never forgive, held the wrinkled hand of a 78-year old woman, with a gentleness that nobody in his empire had ever witnessed. You won't lose me, Grandma, he said softly. No more running, no more losing each other, not anymore. Then he looked at Rose. She stood by the window. Morning sunlight washing over her face, exhausted, steady, eyes that had long since run out of tears. This time Marcus didn't say your family. He didn't have to. She had stayed all night while he lay unconscious. She had thrown a vase at a shooter's head when a bullet was about to hit his back. She had screamed, "Don't you dare," in a smoke-filled corridor with nothing in her hands. She had chosen to stay when anyone else would have run. The actions had already spoken for both of them. And in Rose's eyes, when she looked back at him, there was no more wary distance, no wall, no knife under the pillow. Only a quiet, steady acceptance that she was standing exactly where she was supposed to be. Ada looked from Marcus to Rose and back to Marcus, and smiled, small, tired, but filled with the deep, satisfied contentment of someone finally seeing her family whole. You did good, she said, patting his hand, even if you are an idiot. And Marcus Reed, the shadow of New York, smiled. Not the tight, controlled curve of a mouth he used as a warning. Not the polite smile he showed the world. The smile of an 8-year-old boy on an old sofa in an apartment above a grocery store, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, listening to a lullaby, believing for the very first time that he deserved to be loved. That smile had survived. After 20 years of darkness, after blood and power and loneliness so thick it could stop your breath, that smile was still alive. Ada had kept it alive, one extra plate at a time, and Rose, watching it, finally understood something she had refused to believe for 20 years of abandonments and disappointments. Family isn't a promise. Anyone can make a promise. Family is who stays when everything falls apart. It's the man who drops to his knees before an old woman, while the whole world kneels for him. It's the girl who throws a ceramic vase at an armed shooter. with nothing but bare hands and something she didn't know she had. It's the man who tries to cook porridge at 2 in the morning, even though he doesn't know how. It's the woman who sets an extra plate on the table every single night for 20 years, simply because hope told her that one day, the boy with the sad eyes might find his way home. Real strength isn't the number of people you can command. It's who you're willing to kneel before, and the small kindness Ada planted 20 years ago in a Brooklyn alley. The day she saved a strange little boy, simply because she couldn't stand to watch a child be hurt. That kindness came back, and it saved her granddaughter's life. Because if Ada hadn't saved Marcus that day, Marcus wouldn't have found Ada that night, and Rose wouldn't have had anywhere to bring her when the nursing home flooded. And this story would have ended in a completely different way. Every act of kindness you put into the world is a seed. You might not see it grow. You might have to wait 20 years, but when it blooms, it can save the people you love most. Which moment touched you the most? Was it the moment Ada looked at Rose and didn't recognize her own granddaughter? Was it the moment Rose found out Grandma had set an extra plate, not just at Christmas, but every single night? Or was it the moment a 78-year-old woman stepped into a gunfight with a wooden cane and said, "You will not touch my son"? Tell me, because a story only truly lives when it reaches the heart of the person listening. If this story made you cry or smile or think of someone you love, share it so more people can hear it, and love the people in your life while they are still here. Tell them they matter. Don't wait until they're gone to feel it. Wishing all of you good health, lighter days, and peaceful moments beside the people you love. Thank you for centering